Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much to Civic Hall for this beautiful space. My name is Chelsea Lemon. I am Senior Director of Government Affairs at the Business Council of New York State. We're here today because New York's economic competitiveness is at a turning point. Last fall, our Public Policy Institute released a report on New York's business climate. The findings are stark. New York ranks 50th in business friendliness, taxation, and outmigration. And of 550 business leaders surveyed, only 3% felt that regulators and lawmakers understood and supported their business. Today's program will highlight these challenges, but more importantly, offer recommendations for the future. You'll hear from industry leaders on driving development, job growth, and job creation, and also from Commissioner Jeanette Moy of the Office of General Services, as she is advancing Governor Hochul's vision of making New York a more business-friendly place. So first, I'd like to introduce Ryan Silva, Executive Director of the New York State Economic Development Council, our partner on the report and a dear friend of mine, who will give you a very quick snapshot of the findings and how they're driving change in Albany. Ryan?
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for the introduction, but also thank you for the partnership. I had the privilege of traveling across New York State with you for the better part of 15 months, collecting feedback, engaging stakeholders, and hearing from business leaders on the ground across the state, not just on the challenges, but the opportunities that we face and the opportunities we have to improve our competitiveness. I'm actually also still glad that you're talking to me after spending 15 months on the road with me. But more importantly, I'm grateful for your partnership and leadership on this. As Chelsea noted, the Roadmap for Change was one of the most comprehensive analyses that has been done looking at the business climate and our economic competitiveness. Working with Economic Leadership, a nationally recognized firm doing work in more than 27 states, we looked at both quantitative and qualitative data to reach the conclusions on where New York stands and what we need to do to improve. In order to accomplish this, we needed the support and partnership of organizations and associations from across New York State. This not only gave us the resources needed to complete this work, but allowed for a broad cross-section of 40-plus strategic partners from all across New York to speak with one voice. So I'd like to thank our partners in the room, including the Business Council of New York State and PPI. Thank you, Heather, Chelsea, Patrick, and Paul. Thank you to the Real Estate Board of New York, or REBNY. I know Adele is in the room here with us. I want to thank each of the 5 borough chambers, Lisa Soren from the Bronx Chamber, Jessica Walker from the Manhattan Chamber, Randy Pierce from the Brooklyn Chamber, Linda Barron from the Staten Island Chamber, and also Tom Gretsch from the Queens Chamber. Their thought leadership and strategic partnership helped bring this document and the recommendations to life. And I guess on a personal note, I should also recognize my friend, colleague, and my former boss, Mr. Jim Malatras, who will be speaking on a panel later here today, and thank him for the opportunity he gave me many years ago. I probably wouldn't be standing here otherwise. Not sure that Jim wants that endorsement that I just gave him, but wanted to say thank you, Jim. Sorry, no cropped headshots or fancy images up on the screen that I know you're accustomed to. So rather than focus on the challenges, of which there were many, I'd like to focus on the recommendations and the impact the blueprint is already having in Albany during these ongoing budget negotiations. We identified 5 priority recommendations and more than 3 dozen others that we can implement that will improve our economic competitiveness, several of which we are already seeing progress on. The first was utilizing AI to remove duplicative, redundant, and outdated regulations that create hurdles and increase costs and extend timelines. We are excited and grateful that the governor has prioritized this in her State of the State, utilizing Empire AI to see how we can begin to remove some of the more than 300,000 regulations that currently exist on New York's books. The second was reforming the seeker process to reduce timelines in the environmental review process for projects in New York State. We are once again encouraged and grateful that the governor has proposed changes to the seeker process in her executive budget to exempt some housing and infrastructure projects, and also install a shot clock that limits the amount of time a seeker review can take place on other projects. These are critical and important first steps, and we look forward to supporting the governor to ensure these changes are included in a final budget agreement. The third was to appoint a regulatory czar within the executive chamber to review and assess any new regulation introduced and look at existing regs that can be amended, changed, or removed. We appreciate that the governor has appointed Zoe Jacobs to lead this effort and also want to recognize the Cutting Red Tape agenda along with the online portal, which is now open for individuals to provide specific regulations for any New Yorker to recommend for review. I also want to recognize that Budget Director Blake Washington last October put out a call to all state agencies to find regulations internally that are ripe for removal or reform, and I believe that effort has led to over 100 recommendations that the administration is currently working on. The fourth was to review the state's energy policy and identify ways to address concerns addressing affordability, reliability, generation, and economic business needs. We appreciate the governor's leadership in taking a pragmatic, all-of-the-above approach to address our current needs while striving to achieve our renewable energy goals. This is the important work that we know the governor is looking to address during the budget. And finally, no new tax increases. We are thankful for the governor's executive budget did not increase state income taxes or the corporate income tax. So in closing, there's much to do moving forward, ensuring these recommendations from the blueprint move forward. The work that we collectively did together is working, and we are starting to move in the right direction. We recognize this is an ongoing process, and the blueprint is not a document that is just going to sit on a shelf. It's an action plan that we look forward to working with you on in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Thank you for your time and your support, and now I will turn it back over to Chelsea for the rest of our program.
Okay, well now it's time for our fireside chat. Thank you so much, Brian. I'd like to introduce Heather Mulligan, President and CEO of the Business Council. Heather is joined by Jeanette Moy, Commissioner of the New York State Office of General Services, who is spearheading OGS's efforts to cut red tape and modernize agency regulations. Please welcome Commissioner Moy and Heather.
I'm guessing Patrick knows what I'm going to say because I hate that picture. It was taken, we have our annual meeting up at the Sagamore every year, Lake George, and you should all come because it's really beautiful in September. But that was like the second day of our full day after a very late night cocktail party. And so I'm like, oh my, I can't look at it. But anyways, enough about me. Thanks everyone for being here, and thank you, Commissioner Moy, for joining us. I think this is really an opportunity. I do want you all to know there was actually no fire. It's supposed to be a fireside chat. I don't know where the fireplace is, but as Ryan mentioned, we spent a long time on the road talking to businesses about what are the challenges of doing business in New York, what are the friction points, where are we not competitive, something we hear about a lot, and the culmination of that was our report. And I'm really pleased to say that we've seen a lot of responsiveness from state government. And by the way, Commissioner Moy, just so you know, is a seasoned professional. Really incredible resume, worked for the Bloomberg administration, worked in the Attorney General's office, a lifetime, I think, of public service, it sounds like, so we thank you for that.
Appreciate that.
And you run an extremely important agency, OGS. Do you want to take a minute and talk about, just as an introduction, of what OGS does? Because you're really hugely important to the private sector.
Oh, I really do appreciate that. And I actually started my career in the private sector. So I worked for a Fortune 1 company. I worked for Booz Allen Hamilton. And I joined the city of New York when Michael Bloomberg was building an internal consulting house of sorts. And it was one of the best career moves I've ever made. Similarly, joining the governor's administration has been one of my most sincere pleasures, working for this woman as we try to change the way that state operates. So the Office of General Services, for those of you who don't know, we're sort of a back office support entity, very much like a business. We provide contracting services on behalf of the state, about 1,500 contracts, $44 billion in maximum value. We have about a $5.8 billion design and construction construction portfolio. We oversee the real estate for the state of New York, about 20 million square feet, 12 million square feet of lease spaces as well. And then we also provide some transactional support, finance operations, HR operations. So, I joke a lot of times with my colleagues that when projects are happening or something is a fire or a flood is taking place, somewhere behind the scenes there's a OGS elf trying to make sure that the pieces come together. So that's a bit about our agency. And I would note, as I listened to your podcast and read some of the blueprints, this is very much in line with what the governor has been pushing for 4 years, and I've been commissioner for 4.5 years now. And from the top down, she's been asking us to modernize our operations and make sure that we're outside listening to constituencies, hearing what challenges are at an operational level, and always improving. And that has really been both what's in the guidelines that are here, but also we're seeing it in this year's budget. One of the big pushes around Express New York, this is an opportunity for anyone publicly to provide information. You can go to the governor.ny.gov webpage, provide your input on where regulation is keeping you from moving forward. It's open until April 3rd. This is a very sincere focus of the governor to make sure that we're hearing from all areas where we need to take the bureaucracy out in order for business and our communities to move forward.
So, first off, thank you for all the effort. We hear every day how challenging it is for businesses to engage with state government as a customer, right? And I know you mentioned the portal and the attempts to identify duplicative, burdensome, maybe regulations that no longer really fit the day or fit the moment. On the small business side, if you're a small business and you want to do business with an entity like OGS, what's your entree? How do you get in the door?
It could be really, so first of all, the Office of General Services does a lot of contracting for the state, but we don't do all of it. So we set up a number of contracts that others are leveraging, but we are the first stop for many businesses when they want to interact with the state of New York. And we need to listen. And that was the first change that we tried to implement when I became commissioner, the governor became governor. We started to have listening sessions with businesses to hear what the challenges were. We started to listen to our authorized users to see where are the problems that exist. And that includes challenges around technology, places in which there may be contractual issues that we need to work through. It's part of the reason why you've seen our portfolio grow from 34 billion to 44. We needed to make sure that capacity was there to actually focus on business operations. There are a couple of things that we've done. If you're in design and construction, you can now submit bids online through Bid Express. That allows you to be able to lower the barrier for small businesses to know how to participate in a design contract, an architecture contract, an engineering contract. It makes it easier to be more competitive. We've also looked at ways that we can gather customer feedback. So we've launched a partnership with Procurated so that you can give feedback as an authorized user on your vendor. It's a really simple change, but it allows our contract managers to hear where's the real problems and the pain points. When we come to a negotiation, what has to shift? And as we look towards the future, one of the major things we'll be looking at is also artificial intelligence. Every business out there is starting to look at ways that they can streamline processes, and we want to see where there is in terms of high value, low risk areas, and we know that's in our back office. So we want to look at the search methodology so you can quickly identify the good services and technologies that you need, so you're not focusing on bureaucratic red tape, you're really getting more closer to the speed of business and government.
So, we hear all the time, and I will tell the same story again, that sometimes when you submit something to a state agency, or and not just state, local government, a permit application, or maybe it's a bid, sometimes you just don't hear anything, and it's impossible to find out what's going on.
That's right.
I know that there's efforts to improve the processes. I don't know if that's something that you're familiar with or you want to talk about a little bit?
Absolutely, and I think the transparency in business is incredibly important. So as an example, we started doing something called Build New York, where we would preview for the industry what are our projects that are happening across the state. If I've got a big contract portfolio, I want folks to know that they're going to be able to compete on it. Those types of communications set expectations, but a lot of it also requires technology changes. So we are about to launch a new e-procurement system so that we can actually allow, if you're a business and you're participating participating with us, where are you from a contract perspective? What's the status? What is the action? Is it happening on the agency side? Is it happening on OGS's side? Is there a contract review that has to take place with an oversight authority like OSC or the AG's office? These are really simple changes. I know I've heard the pizza story.
Yeah, that's the story I was going to tell, and I feel
I'm
like
sorry.
almost everybody in the no, and then I skipped it and just asked you a question, so it's fine.
But I will say, though, what I found really compelling about this is that consumer preferences and expectations have changed, right? And I think that's true. It's happened a few times, right? I think 20 years ago, when I was in the Bloomberg administration, we were talking about social media, and no one wanted to use what was then called Twitter. But the world had shifted, and that was the primary communication tool at that time. And government just had to catch up. And when we talk about expectations for delivery, if I have something where I'm either ordering food or I'm ordering a package, you know where it is, when it left the distribution point, when I should expect it, and when a problem arises, it allows me to call and follow up. That's the kind of service that we're working towards when we think about e-procurement, when we think about modernizing our systems. And we've just got to start breaking down those processes to start delivering for New Yorkers.
So how competitive are the processes? Are there lots of opportunities available to lots of kinds of entities? Or is it sort of a narrow hallway that you have to fit yourself into?
Government is a business,
Yeah.
right? They're good service and technology, whether it's selling a laptop or technology solution. Everything that you can imagine, government is procuring at this moment in time. And you just have to find the opportunity. And I think that's really critical at this moment. So I would say, if you're a small business, we're one start. I see there's someone from Empire State Development here as well. We want to lower the barriers to participate in government services and government procurement, because that allows all businesses to be competitive. So one of the changes that was proposed by the governor was to raise the thresholds for purchasing, right? To move it from $50,000 to $300,000. Well, a small purchase, if you're spending your staff time to review a significant procurement where it might take 12 months, 18 months, that's time that they could spend on other things. And so by raising the threshold from 50 to 300, we're also streamlining the process. We're focusing on higher risk contracts as opposed to lower risk items. So for my agency, that might be window washing. Do I really want to spend or have a staff person focusing on a procurement for 12 months around window washing? No, it's not a high value. But if we raise these thresholds to simplify it, it also means that if you're a small business, you don't have to worry about some of the duplicative red tape when you're submitting. You don't have to worry about having a slow timeline to respond back, which might be tying up your sales team or tying up your operations. These are really small, common sense reforms that we think will advance the ball, not just for business, but also for agencies that are equally frustrated with the process.
So where would a business go to find the opportunities?
Contract Rapport is a great place, and of course there are also niche spots. So if you are in design and construction, you might be looking at Bid Express. There are so many different ways to understand, but you would start off with that contract reporter. And then also, one of the things we brought back recently was GovBuy. So we have an in-person location where you can connect as an authorized user with businesses. There are 1,500 centralized contracts. We know that contracts are important, but so is community connection. And just having a pathway by which you can connect with businesses is incredibly important, and we brought that back as well.
So can you explain that a little bit, what the GovBuy?
It's an in-person conference where we both train procurement individuals about how to purchase goods and services, but also invite the business community in so that they're connecting as well. So there are a lot of opportunities that exist to find how to do business, and it also requires that agencies are getting out and speaking to community organizations, speaking to businesses like all of you.
Yeah, so I mean, to the extent that these things are available, we would love to partner with OGS in amplifying the opportunities. I mean, you're making me want to start a business, which is probably a bad idea at this point in my life, but
I think you would run a great business. I think, look, when we talk about small businesses in particular, whether you're an MBB, a minority-owned business, a women-owned business, a service-disabled-owned veterans business, we want to make the process easy. And agencies have targets, right? We want to engage with local New York businesses. That's a success story.
Right.
But we need to get the red tape out of the way so that we can focus on the programs that are important to New Yorkers. And I would note, We're talking about cutting red tape and some of the seeker reforms. These are opportunities where the governor, we know that she's focused on public safety. We know she's focused on affordability and on housing. So removing the barriers that keep us from delivering on these promises to the public and the needs of New Yorkers is incredibly important.
So for things like housing, I mean, obviously there are layers and layers of issues that have constrained the housing market and the ability to build affordable. Some of it is local regulations. And actually, if you see the city of Albany, just, they're in the process of reversing a well-intentioned local regulation that basically stopped all market rate housing development in the city for a period of years. I look at CLCPA and the governor's sort of attempt or looking at trying to at least slow down the clock a little bit as very similar. It's like, okay, we need to adjust course. We see this isn't working or achievable. We need to adjust course a little bit. And I see that as very positive. Along the same lines, reforming procurement processes, making it easier for businesses to figure out how to do business with the state. Kind of all about cutting red tape.
I think the state has certain priorities, and in order for us to be able to attract businesses like Micron into New York, grow communities so that there's more housing that's available when we're spinning up these industries, it requires a whole of government approach. And that means that when we've got duplicative red tape, when we've got processes that don't make sense, we've got to get the barriers out of the way. And I think the governor has promoted that also when it comes to shovel-ready sites through Fast New York, which is one of the programs, Power New York, focusing on ensuring that we have adequate transmission. We've got to have a whole of government approach to really advance the ball if we want to build housing here in New York.
Right, and the state's not going to be building the housing. It'll be the private sector
And
by and large, right?
No, I think that's right. And if you look back, going back 2 years, as we started to look at affordable housing opportunities, the governor asked OGS, try to identify locations in which they're underutilized state properties. How do we put that back to productive use? And just common sense items, like how do we make the public aware of what those sites are? Maybe it's a property that was intended to be an access road. Maybe it was a piece of property that's no longer being used because the site has closed. That should be put back for community use. And those are the priorities from a focus perspective. I think the governor is very much aware that over the last 5 years, I say this at my agency, we have had a crisis I would not have predicted every single year. This year, what's happening at an international level, at a federal level, we think about the tariffs and the uncertainty that's happening in business, making sure that we are trying to have flexibility in terms of, from a budget perspective, she has some of the highest reserves ever in state history to deal with those types of issues, while also balancing it with ensuring that we are adapting to some of the issues on the ground are very important to advance New York's priorities.
So, step back a minute. How big is OGS? How many? Because it sounds like 100,000 people work there.
We have 2,000 employees. It feels that way. I mean, we've got great staff at OGS, but we have 2,000 employees within the agency, about a $1.7 billion budget.
And where are they located?
They're located across the state. So we have some employees here in New York. We have most of our staff in Albany, but we also operate the statewide buildings. So, everywhere from Poughkeepsie out to Brentwood. We have staff in Buffalo. And of course, because we do construction on behalf of other agencies, we have regional field sites across the state. So right now, we are working at the Lexington Avenue Armory, which is right around the corner from here.
Yeah.
We're doing a building retrofit there and that restoration. We're working on the Jones Beach East Bathhouse out on Long Island. We just completed work on the Adirondack Rail Trail. So there's a lot of great projects statewide where it advances some of the economic goals and helps to really engage with local communities.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a very big agency. How do you do this? I mean, how do you manage your day?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about our kids.
Yeah.
So I have 3 children. I have certain red lines with my kids, about life. I like to make sure that I eat breakfast with them every single morning. That's the way that I start my day. I start every day at about 5:30 in the morning so that I can start my day with them. I try to spend some time with the team to make sure I know what the daily priorities are. And a lot of times I'm doing just this, spreading the message about the governor across the state. And I would say, because I'm a data person, our agency has been trying to turn every aspect of our work into a performance dashboard or some sort of data analytic. And so every one of our teams builds and they provide out services out to our clients. I like to know, are we trending up? Are we trending down? Where are our challenge areas? So that just helps to keep it organized at work. And then on the side, I watch a lot of basketball with my kids. And I watch a lot of really bad Korean dramas. So if you are interested in a few of them, there's a couple that I am
I
slightly
would be,
obsessed
so
with.
offline, we'll talk
I
about
think,
that.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I wanted to just take a second and like, if you could fast forward of like future vision, this agency operating at its best capacity, how would you describe it? Like, what would be the big sort of efficiencies, streamlining? I don't know. I'm trying to assign
Yeah.
success to it, and what does it look like?
I mean, so for me, when I joined as commissioner, I wanted us not to be just a transactional agency. I wanted us to be upstream. I wanted us to be the one that you called when you had a problem in order to fix it. And we're really getting so far along from there. I see some colleagues that are out here in the room, and every major crisis, I've been so proud that our team has been at the table to help support the governor and to advance the work. In a couple of years, I'd look back. We're starting to work with AI this year, trying to understand how to make it easier to do business. I'm hoping in a couple of years that e-procurement system is launched and ready, and you never have to talk to one of our employees in order to execute a contract. You're doing it all electronically. That's success to me. And I hope that we create the structural changes that you can't step back from it. And so I believe very deeply in transparency. We have publicly, we're leading the governor's efforts around the EV conversion for our fleet. We're doing some work around decarbonization. We're heading efforts around the Office of Language Access. All of our efforts right now, you can find public dashboards that you can hold me accountable for whether or not I'm getting that work done. And we're trying to do that for every one of our service lines. And that, to me, is a real transformation, because that means when I'm talking to one of my colleagues and they have a challenge, we're problem solving as opposed to debating about the facts. Is this a problem or is it not? So that's success for me. And I think that's what the governor intended when she asked us to look at our operations, make it run more smoothly, find the places in which we may be a barrier and just improve upon it. And that's been one of the real delights.
And so OGS is involved, for example, in storm response recovery. If there's a big storm event, is that?
We have done cleanup after the storm event. When the migrant crisis was really at its height here in New York City, we were helping to bring back maybe long dormant buildings. We were executing leases with the federal government. We were working through, during the pandemic, some of the logistics around purchasing. There's so many ways in which OGS really is, government is so large,
Yeah.
but a lot of times it's a partnership with vendors in the private sector in order to execute. So that's contracting, right? That's finding the right partner and vendor and making sure you're setting up those expectations appropriately. So a lot of times with emergencies, we're right there.
Yeah, it seems like you should have a different name. Like, general services doesn't seem to capture.
Yeah, so we have a tagline here. I'm a little cheesy. It's on my mom's side, but we always say OGS is the home of only good stuff.
Oh,
I have stickers, so if anyone wants, we can send you some. But yeah, no, absolutely.
I had a button when I worked in the Senate that said, "Trust me, I'm with the government and I'm here to help." And it was sarcastic.
Oh, is that right?
Unfortunately. Yeah, it was.
I mean, though, it's so interesting because I think I'm a really proud public servant.
Yeah.
And I would say, and I've been in the private sector, but one of the things that I think is really true, especially in this moment, there is such a low level of trust when it comes to institutions, and it erodes at the ability to just have basic business conversations. And so, I think this governor has been focused on making sure that we are transparent in our work, that when we commit to something, that we're following through on it, that we're balancing those activities, and that we're always listening. I think that's why, I've done a number of road shows at this moment, and hearing from folks in North Country and Syracuse and Rochester, it makes us better as agencies. And, I hope that helps to build back some of the trust that really has been, really removed from public discourse.
No, and I think what you're saying is exactly right, that there's not necessarily a full awareness of how accessible the state agencies are to businesses. We've experienced this. I mean, I'm very friendly with the Commissioner of Labor. She's an incredibly accessible person. She's willing to talk to any business. And I think that is not necessarily the impression that people have of government. But once they meet you and the Commissioner of Labor and the Comptroller and other folks from state government, they realize you're people, but you're also very accessible and willing to listen. And for that, I really appreciate all the effort around making life easier for business in New York. We've got a lot to contend with, but having a good relationship with the state agencies is certainly a very, we're in a good direction there, I think. And this project, this blueprint project, while it was a hard reality, that the results of it, the resulting effort from state government so far has been really encouraging. And I thank you, I thank the governor for that effort. So what else do you want people to know about OGS?
So one is that we're open for business. We're also hiring. So, there's always an opportunity to get great people in the door here at the state of New York. But, I would say there's a lot of work that we do writ large in terms of innovation, and we're always open for new ideas. So very genuinely, if you haven't intersected with our agency, come to one of our roundtables on our procurement side, be a part of our ecosystem, compete on our projects. And if you do have a problem, we are listening. I pay very close attention to every single project that goes out the door. So just know that we're here and that we're looking to deliver on behalf of New Yorkers.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. Can everyone please round of applause for Commissioner? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Thank you, Heather. Okay, it is now time for our panel discussion. It's moderated by Emma Foman. She is the CEO of Association for a Better New York. And today's panelists include Kenny Burgos. He's the CEO of the New York Apartment Association. Loycent Gordon, owner and CEO of Historic Nears Tavern in Woodhaven, Queens. Jim Malatras, he is the Chief Strategy Officer and Senior Vice President of Education at the FedCap Group, and Julie Samuels, President and CEO of Tech NYC. Emma, panel, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Thank you to the Business Council for hosting us today. What an esteemed group we have. I started my career at the Department of Small Business Services at New York City, and so this feels like a little bit of a state-centered homecoming, but love that we've assembled such a great group. So to dive right in, I have a question for everyone on the panel. We'll do some targeted questions, but I think there's certainly a lot of challenges, concerns, anxieties at this moment, and certainly outlined in the report around business friendliness, taxes, a number of concerns, tariffs, as were mentioned earlier. I feel like these are just a piece of the story, and I would love, each of you represent different sectors, and would love sort of your firsthand perspectives on, your biggest singular challenge that you face day to day.
Since I'm right here, I go
Please.
first. It's very difficult to try to outline how challenging it is to do business, especially a small single location. Very different from a business that has multiple locations and can actually defray costs or spread costs across their different locations. So I have a single location restaurant. And so I'm not going to be able to outline every single thing, but I'm going to say this, that one of the biggest challenges is uncertainty, right? Capital flows where certainty is. And New York City, and for the large part, in some ways, the state, is oftentimes very uncertain. Now, we have things that's happening federally that often is beyond our control. What we can do as a state is to ensure that we stand up loudly, proudly, as best as possible to let the business community know, and small business like me know, that we got your back, right? We got your back. Keep operating, keep investing, and stay in New York. And that would help reduce some of that uncertainty. So without getting into all of the minutiae, I think it's important to understand how uncertainty is truly a driver of capital into this city, into this state. And I just want to kind of just start off that way.
Well, thank you. It's a little weird being here. This is where I work, so I don't have to go very far. We're a not-for-profit, FedCap, and I could, of course, complain about prompt payment and all those other things. But actually, the largest challenge is we think about not-for-profit sector differently. We actually want to get people out of the social safety net. We want to put ourselves out of business. But often we run into, well, that's not what not-for-profits do. They don't build wage and wealth for people who are barriered. A place like this is the largest innovation center in the United States of America, is an example of what we try to do. Bring people here who don't have opportunities and give them the opportunity to actually build employment. But to our panelist's point, uncertainty does actually hurt a not-for-profit. The climate, affordability climate does hurt not-for-profits. When your margins are this thin, you can't do those things. So I think tackling red tape for us is affordability. How can you afford to live in this great state of New York? We're all here for a reason, the greatest city in the world and the greatest state in the world. But it gets harder and harder every day to do that. And I think working together with government, the for-profit sector, the not-for-profit sector, has to really happen in a unique way here, or we're going to be pushed out of the state. So I think this panel is an important panel, and we face a lot of problems that we can complain about all day, but we really want to bring solutions to the table.
I think I'll keep with the theme of uncertainty. So for those who don't know, I represent the New York Apartment Association, which is a trade organization of rent-stabilized property owners throughout the entire city of New York. So you're talking about a group of owners who operate some of the most heavily regulated housing arguably in the country. And what we think about and what we struggle with on a day-to-day basis is, of course, that regulation is almost ever moving, and we are regulated from the federal to the state to the city level. And with an issue like housing, which when you check every single poll across the country, and especially in New York, it is people's number one issue. I think when you poll folks and you hear about affordability, inflation, and housing, to me that all means the same thing. Because to me personally, I think most issues we deal with in New York and most issues people are thinking about run downstream of that housing. And so for us, being those housing providers, making sure that we're good partners with our elected officials and local government and providing that housing can be tricky, especially again just operating under an environment that seems to be shifting at any given moment. But we try to do our best, of course, to be those great partners, those great stewards of housing, and ensure we're delivering just a high quality product.
Okay, I'm going to bring up the rear. I'm Julie Samuels from Tech NYC. So great to be up here with all of you and with all of you out there. I obviously representing the tech sector. I'd start from the baseline, and I can recite a lot of data to back this up, but I think we all know that the technology sector is what is going to drive the future of our economy. That's true in New York City, that's true in New York State, that's true nationally and internationally as well. And the other thing we know for certain about tech companies and tech employers is that they will go where the people they want to hire are, period, full stop. And we have been for the past, surely since COVID, but really for the past decade, booming in New York when it comes to tech, because young, dynamic people, particularly in the city, they want to live here. There's a very kind of urbanism thread culturally in the tech sector that attracts companies, and that's worked really, really well for us. So in this moment, things actually, the tech sector looks better than a lot of other traditional business sectors from a numbers perspective, but you just need to, it's like kind of glass half full, glass half empty thing. And I think we'd be foolish to not also look at the other side. You see what is happening in other cities and states. Employers are leaving other blue cities and states. Literally every day this week, I've read about different big name people and companies moving headquarters. And I think we cannot assume that won't happen here, but I think if we're smart and ensure that people want to live here, then the companies also will stay here. So I feel generally good, but also cautious.
I appreciate that. Julie, you've been very involved in New York's tech renaissance and, of course, attracted a lot of tech to New York City. Thank you for all of that. There has to be, I agree with you and your cautious optimism. I will say that there has to be a balance of providing the services that we all need and not scaring all of the businesses out of town. How would you, maybe using tech as a model, talk about how we expand innovation economies, attract other industries to the city?
Yeah, well, I think there's a number of ways, and it's so great to hear from the commissioner, Jeanette's here, that, when you think, first of all, okay, take the affordability crisis. Clearly, that is something that is top of mind for New Yorkers and, frankly, all Americans right now, I would say. One way to address that is to make government work better, right? And a very obvious way to do that is to deploy technology solutions are not going to fix our affordability crisis. I don't mean to overstate here, but I think we all know that we could streamline a lot of government operations. There are a lot of savings to be found in budgets. There are a lot of ways we could just make government work better for New Yorkers, less time on lines, make processes move quicker, and that is a component. It's not the whole thing, but that is a component of affordability. I also am a fundamental believer that if the private sector sees our government, state level and city level, embracing technologies, being open-minded to trying new things, that sends a message. And to some earlier points about uncertainty, it's not just uncertainty, but it's also, to my mind, it's rhetoric. It's really just reminding businesses and builders that we're open here, that we want you here. And I think that is something that we can all work on together very well to attract more business activity.
That's great. I'm glad that SECRA was mentioned earlier, and Governor Hochul has certainly been a big proponent and led with a number of other partners to sort of accelerate housing development. If we use that as a model, how is that a model for other sectors to sort of cut red tape as it relates to business growth outside of the housing space? For anyone.
Well, I guess I'll speak within the housing space. I think we've reached the point of political consensus where we recognize, if this wasn't the case even 10 years ago, where you just need more housing, right? And part of those obstacles are issues like SECRA, which have a time and a cost associated with them. And I think there's no question, while I'm not the expert in other industries, when you incur additional time, that's going to incur additional expense, which then translates to higher costs, whether it's a consumer good or something like renting an apartment. But I would say in that vein for us, it still relates to regulatory housing because we still deal with that in trying to work with that regulation, let's say in bringing an apartment back online. There's still a host of regulations that you have to abide by that have cost part of it that can delay bringing that housing that is so desperately needed right now within New York City. When it comes to, I should have said this in the beginning, right? But part of what keeps us up at night is that not only do we represent this regulated housing, but the regulation has become so stringent to the point where you have a large sector of the rent-stabilized housing space that is functionally bankrupt. 100,000 apartments that are cash flow negative and are underwater. And this poses not just a threat to property owners and banks, which most New Yorkers wouldn't shed a tear for, but what keeps me up at night is there are hundreds of thousands of people who live within this housing. And when that housing stock starts to go under, we don't seem to have an answer on how we replace it. And that's going to impact so many lives that I think it's almost incalculable.
Well, that doesn't sound good. I'll give that's scary, Ken.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put a
He's
damper
giving
on
out
it.
free housing to everyone by the end of the show today. So I will give another area, which is just as important. It gets into the tech space about why we have to work better as sectors. Take the education and workforce sector. They are two wholly distinct sectors. Anybody ever work with an WEO, federal WEO program? That's really difficult. Anybody work in the Title IV Pell spot education? They don't even talk to one another. It's the same people that we're trying to train for a modern workforce, and they're wholly different systems. We have to be more flexible in a regulatory approach in all of our sectors to work together. By the way, Education and healthcare are the two biggest source of funding in the state of New York. We spend billions of dollars in education. Our outcomes are middling. By the way, how do we solve some of the affordability crisis? Create damn good jobs for people to be in. That solves the affordability crisis, but we are actually barring ourselves from those things because we are treating these things as separate enterprises. You want to fix a housing problem? Yes. Make the housing sector more affordable. Give people higher wages to afford the things that they want to afford in life, childcare, other things. So all of this works together. Too often, though, we treat these things as separate enterprises. The technology space should be woven into all of these sectors, right? AI could be a powerful tool, not just everybody chat GPTing things, but how do you integrate that into our sectors? That helps lower the cost, raise the private sector and other things as well.
Thanks, Jim. I'm glad you brought it to workforce development, which is all I really want to talk about every day, but I do have other questions I will ask. But I think that you're absolutely right, and the point that economic development and kind of business growth is so tightly intertwined with workforce development and job growth, and I feel like that connection isn't always drawn, and to the rhetoric point, we should continue to support that. If there was one sort of workforce development policy change that you would recommend, Jim, in this broader space, is there a policy that we could institute to help businesses stay here?
I think one of the things you have to do is more flexible funding for businesses to work with the educational workforce sector to meet growing demand. It's not easy to do that, right? So if we see the tech sector is flourishing here, it's really difficult, even in a space that we're in right now, to thread together the programs needed for industry. The red tape on that, if we want to talk about red tape, is really significant. And so that type of flexibility in our system funding, I think, would go a long way of solving the affordability crisis at many levels. But we think about it in the old paradigm of you're in a workforce bucket, you're in an education bucket, you're in a housing bucket, but they're all interrelated, really.
Can I build on that for 1 second? At this moment, this is so acute because obviously all you have to do is, I was going to say open the newspaper, but open the browser on your phone or whatever, wherever you get the news, and it seems that everyone is talking about workforce and what the jobs of the future are going to look like, and AI is coming, and I will just tell you that if anyone tells you that they know what the jobs of the future are going to look like, they're lying. There are clues, but no one knows. The employers don't know. We are living in a moment of transformation. And to Jim's point, it has never been more important. In all the years I've been doing this work, I have never felt that it was more important that we all work together and in real time have these conversations because it is rapidly changing. And this is something that government is slow by design. And we have to find a way now more than ever to push back on that because the jobs in 5 years are not going to look like what the jobs look like today. I'm an optimist. I think that history is a guide and there will be more jobs at the end of this transition, but they will be different. And that transition is going to be hard. The best case scenario is a hard transition. So it's more important than ever that we break down those barriers and really find a way to push through that moment.
I do feel better that I never learned to code, though.
That's complicated.
We're discussing a little bit about, jobs, workforce development, and I think it's important to remember, how do we create more jobs, right? And let's kind of just cut a lot of this away and just say fundamentally, first principles, how do we create more jobs? And jobs are created by businesses, correct? So what we have here is a downward pressure on starting a business. We need to look at how do we have more affordable capital without the personal guarantee in terms of, you're going to take my firstborn, right? And if we're able to reduce some of that inefficiency in the businesses, in the city and the state, and have access to more capital, more affordable capital, you could start more business and you have more jobs. Now, when you look at actual pay, $30 minimum wage, I will pay you $100 minimum wage if I was making it, right? So first principles really tell you that allow the businesses to operate, to be innovative, to create new products and new value in the marketplace. When you create more value in the marketplace, you can pay people more. Now, the idea is not just to unilaterally just to raise minimum wage. where is the productivity, right? That is the thing that we're all missing. When you're talking about raising minimum wage and not equally talking about productivity in that minimum wage, you are totally losing the central idea of how a business and producing jobs work. And those people that's out there making regulations and throwing them on small business to figure it out have no clue how this simple economy works. Now, I'm not an economist. I own a little restaurant, one location place.
A little restaurant, he says.
But I know enough to say that you cannot just throw a number out there and say, we're going to pay this person, and not understand the productivity that needs to be gained in order for that to be sustainable. You're shooting yourself in your foot, and what's happening is that the government and these legislators are biting the hands that feed them, right? They're biting and reducing the jobs that's producing the tax base. When I say biting the hands that feed you, right? Because what's feeding you is that the jobs are creating the tax base. And when the tax base is healthy, right? When the jobs are healthy, tax base is healthy, right? So we have to look at how do we truly reduce the inefficiencies in business, look at access to capital for new upstarts, and make things more streamlined. Use the technology. I'm going to give you one more example, if you don't mind.
Please,
I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
So New York State Empire Development had this program. So JFK, excuse me, I don't know if you guys know that JFK is having this $19 billion redevelopment thing. And so part of the initiative, rightfully so, is actually to incorporate local business in that renovation, that redevelopment. How do we incorporate them in that ecosystem rather than have these multinational corporations sucking all the value out of that, and nothing is left for the local business to actually, prosper, right? So what they've done is create this $50 million fund that they got partly from the federal government, and allowed local businesses to use part of that fund to invest in the concession build out in JFK. It's really an amazing. Now, what has happened is that they partner with other local banks, and now you have this blended rate, the lower cost of capital provided by the government and market rate capital with the private, and now you blend it. So now you have a pretty decent interest rate to invest in these concessions. And I'm in 3 joint ventures in JFK because of it. And we have multiple joint venture operations that's starting to opening up. I would have never have that opportunity. I'd still be trying to figure out how do I sell more burgers to pay this wages that keeps going up more and more and more, right? So I'm not going to details it, but I'm just showing you there's examples how we can have more affordable access to capital, reduce the inefficiencies of government, and allow the small business to generate more jobs so the economy can grow.
I love that. And I'm glad you brought us back to small businesses, because I think anyone who's owning a brick and mortar establishment right now is, stronger than I, certainly. And would love to hear, I love that, hearing more about the JFK development and how they've used levers to help support small businesses. What do you see, bring us into your day-to-day, and what do you see as really the biggest kind of challenges, impediments to starting a business right now?
Starting a business. I think, first of all, I think we have to remember that you first have to have the drive and the gumption to say, I want to start a business. People have said, I think the funny thing is they said, you see this meme, I quit my 9 to 5 and now I'm working 24/7 in my business, right? So you got to have the push, that entrepreneurial spirit, and that only can be done if the environment is accommodating for it. And so it's very hard right now to actually think about that. And I don't want to get away from your question, but all I could remember, and when someone tells me they want to start a business, is just in my mind trying to fight to tell them don't do it, right? Because I know how hard it is. And I shouldn't be doing that. I should be encouraging it. But I understand the difficulties. And just last week, actually the brick and mortar is very challenging, more so than most small business. we were burglarized, right? We had 2-3 hours after we closed, we had people trying to access our side door and crowbarring, damaging things. And thank God, after 35 minutes, 25 minutes of trying to get in, the alarm went off, and then they ran off. All right. So I don't want to dissuade people, but I think it's important to remember the environment has to be conducive to conduct business, or the dream will remain a dream. All right. And I can list so many impediments to actually doing that, but I think we need to just get back to first principles, and that's my theme today, is to get back to first principles. How do we make a dollar? We have to create economic value. And that is the main thing that I want to really kind of get across to everyone.
I appreciate that. We've heard some good ideas and existing programs to support small businesses. AI was mentioned. I think there's so much that can be done. Being a recovering bureaucrat myself, so much that can be done technology-wise inside government. Also, this, I think, innovative model of financing at JFK. What other kind of proposals or recommendations do you have for the fabulous government people in the room for supporting the business sector broadly? Sectors and everyone on the panel.
I mean, I'll say this. I don't want to monopolize the microphone, but I do want to say this because we have legislators that take over, that represent a certain area, right? I think we need to have these government agencies, or we need to have these people that's in the government that is responsible for a certain area in terms of all in, right? Everything. We have to deal with all these different departments. But it's really be interesting if you could have a representative in that specific area, like a legislator covers this specific area, and I just go to that person because the business is the product. We have to service it. We have to make sure customer success is right. We have to market it, and we want to make sure it's simple. Okay, great. You're my main person. You're going to help me get through all of this stuff that's happening. And what has happened is that you could tell how inefficient a government is by how many expediters there are, right? Use that as a metric to see how efficient is New York State? How efficient is Florida? Well, how many expediters do they have? And anytime you create a law, which is, 24,008 bills and whatever, well, how many expediters are popping up, right? And that's the things that we got to do, because if we drains our money because we have to pay for lawyers, consultants, architects, and expediters to do this one thing that we want to do, and we don't have the government representative to say, I'm going to go to this one person so I don't have to go pay all that money. Now you're creating economic value because I'm not throwing money at these, nothing wrong with, expediters, but, throwing away. I could be paying $30 minimum wage to my employee.
You heard it here first.
By the way, we had to use expediters for this building, which was a public-private sector partnership with the city government. Which
Jim,
tells you-
I just heard this week that the city government has to use expediters for its own projects, which I did not know.
But this is the colleague we want to listen to because he's actually on the ground. What he said, which was the most troubling thing was, and you hear it in the not-for-profit sector too, or the housing sector, or the technology sector, people give up. That's the worst thing you can hear, because once that starts, the circle starts to go down and the wealth starts to leave. And it doesn't matter what government intervention you do. It's a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. And the fact of the matter, which no one's want to raise the elephant in the room, is the cost burden too high in New York? The answer is yes. The cost burden is too high. I remember when I was in government, we went from 50 to 47th one year. We were like jumping for joy. I'm like, we went to 47th. That's not great, by the way. 47th is bad. But that's how we measured it. We got an expediter to get us from 50 to 47. But that's the thing that you worry about, because once that happens, we train, by the way, we put 30,000 people in jobs every year. We help 330,000 people every year. But if we train people, but there's no jobs left, none of that matters. So this is a really important conversation perspective to have. But yes, we too use expediters for a government project.
That's so hilarious. I go.
Jim, you said something that we joke about in my office. So, as you said, people will weigh the cost and decide whether or not they want to engage in business or conduct business here in the state. For our business and our industry, we joke and say they have us by the foundation, right? Our owners can't exactly take their buildings and move them out of the state. So to get to the question that you asked, when we talk about sort of what can we do to try and fix the cogs and the wheels here, we have to look back a bit, right? A housing crisis is nothing new to New York. You can go back as far as 1920 and there was a housing crisis then. And what happened? The market responded. Under much less regulation, under much less government interference, we were building something like 70,000 units of housing every year for a population that was but a third of what we have today. Right now in New York, we probably produce on a good year roughly 30,000 units of housing. And experts at this point agree, you want to reduce the rents, you want to provide affordability. The answer is there. You have to provide the housing. So this is almost a manufactured crisis by our own government, right? When you implement something like the 1961 zoning change that made it illegal to build a 6-story building in certain neighborhoods for the great cause of preserving neighborhood character or whatever other excuses they would make, you've manufactured a crisis where now it is impossibly expensive to find housing here in New York. And so we have to look to the past, in my eyes. We have to look at what is slowing down that production line. Again, Secret, one of them. But of course, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't speak to our sector of housing, because rent-stabilized housing is almost 40% of the housing market. So you can't ignore it. It has a huge impact on the market despite not really being a free market tool. And you have regulation at this point that it makes it so cost prohibitive to invest in this housing, to bring it online, that we are currently sitting right now in a moment of a housing crisis where there's over 50,000 apartments sitting empty. And that's not an exaggeration. I'm in these buildings every week and I'm stepping into 3-bedroom apartments that have been vacant for 3 years and are there sitting empty for nothing but regulation. And to me, that is an absolute failure of government. It's an absolute failure when there are families right now looking for that housing, and we should be finding the fastest way to bring it back online.
One thing I'll say, I really appreciate the looking back, and I'm going to quickly take a look forward. And I know I've already talked about technology and government, but I want to tell you all about one project that we're doing at the Tech NYC Foundation that I think is instructive. It's called Decoded Futures. We work with cohorts, and that's why we focused on nonprofits. And so we work with cohorts of New York City nonprofits, and over the course of 8 weeks, we pair them with volunteers from the private sector, and we teach them and we work with them to build internal AI capacity. We don't parachute in and say, here's a tool, this is how you use it. We work with them on the kind of cultural change and on building the muscle so that as the tools continue to evolve, they can continue to use them. It's transformative. At the end of the cohorts, they present their projects. I literally sometimes tear up. It's amazing to see what the kind of capacity these tools can bring for resource-strapped organizations like nonprofits. Let me tell you 2 other examples of resource-strapped organizations: small businesses and government. And so while so many people are rightfully talking about the risks of job loss and how we should be thinking about a shifting workforce, I can tell you that when you're talking about resource-strapped organizations, it's not about job loss. It's about doing more with what you've got. And I see it firsthand through this project of ours. And we're working on expanding it, and we're looking at small businesses, and we're looking at partnering with government to try and bring these skills into these organizations. And again, it's not about cutting jobs, but it's about doing more with what you have. And that every time I talk to these nonprofits who've been through our program, I feel great. I feel like, oh, this is it. Like this is what we need to be doing more of. And so that's my forward-looking take.
Love that. I think we'll end on one other question and then go to audience questions if folks have them. Back on the workforce piece, I think Decoded Futures is such a great effort. I know you have other workforce development and kind of training opportunities, as does Jim at FedCap. What does it look like, and what are you hearing from employers right now? And what are you hearing, in your own work around connecting recently trained and recent grads to positions? Are we seeing that struggle already? I think that you're right to not have us totally spiral about the future of AI and the future of what jobs are going to be available. But what are we hearing on the ground in this moment, and how can that be instructive?
this is a challenge. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. I think that I'm speaking mostly from the perspective of tech employers, but there is a lot of uncertainty in the market, not just from government. There's uncertainty in the market as well, and I think that employers are a little gun shy around hiring right now. They're very trepidatious in working with their traditional workforce development partners, again, because they see the work shifting and they don't exactly know where it's going. And so some of the things we're thinking about is finding ways to take graduates from workforce programs, for instance, and maybe place them in project-based learnings, put them out in the field doing work, maybe getting we've seen a couple of pilots, Pursuit and Perscolis both have these great pilots right now where they're taking graduates from their programs, placing them at small businesses. Their salaries are being paid by funders. And the idea is hopefully after a year of this, they'll have real work experience, they'll have projects on their resume, and hopefully we'll have a slightly better sense of where the jobs are going. But again, it's a little confusing right now what the jobs are going to look like, but there are certain first principles we know, and we've seen this again through our Decoded Futures work. There's first principles around computational thinking, why you don't need to necessarily learn how to code anymore. There are certain skills. Oh my God, look at the weather. I'm so sorry. There's a blizzard outside. That was wild. And so as we think, there's a lot of really smart people thinking about this, like computational thinking is the perfect example. What are the skills? How can we teach people to work in an environment where the jobs and the tasks are rapidly changing and where we can admit that we don't know what they will look like 18 months from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. We have to talk to people in this moment like grown-ups. And I think sometimes we're missing actually that in our discourse.
The fastest growing program here, one of our providers, they train people who are underemployed recent college graduates, which tells you everything you need to know about the current system and the marketplace. That shouldn't be the fastest growing system. The second thing is, I can talk all day about this, I think we're way behind the 8 ball in building the right pedagogy or programs to work with employers. Automation, ChatGPT, AI is all a function of that. We were talking about that 10 years ago, saying automation is going to replace nearly half of the jobs in our workforce, not reduce jobs by 50%, but change the nature of industry. As if we just ignored that, 10 years later, we're now talking about, oh my God, what are we going to do to deal with automation? By the way, these periods of transformation are not new. Does anybody put a token in a toll booth anymore? No, we change. But I think we've been slow to that. Where I've actually seen the most innovation, which can't be driven, are the students themselves. Where AI is being driven in some of our programs here are by the students that are coming in and just innovating themselves on that front. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there to actually drive change here.
Can I just say one more quick thing? I agree with everything you just said, and what I do say and what I would say to a lot of our regulators and legislators is, like, I don't think we should be spending our time right now fighting about where the data centers are. We should be using all of our energy to focus on that very question that Jim just talked about. Like, how do we get through this transition? The technology is coming. We cannot put our heads in the sand. We can't pretend otherwise. And we need like the smartest people to roll up their sleeves right now and figure this out, or else it's gonna be painful.
There's one silver lining. COVID was a lot of bad things, but it actually opened up access points for lots of people. One of the innovations was a more hybrid approach to learning, multiple modalities. Do it at home sometimes, do it in person. We run a Apex Technical School, 60 years, does the trades. That's growing like crazy, by the way. Sadly, not growing as fast here, but growing. Our biggest growing demographic is women of color in the outer boroughs because he simply changed how we taught. You could do your theory at home. So if you have kids, you don't have to come in that day. It's opened up a whole new world for barriered communities. We need more of that type of thinking in our systems to help with the workforce and all those other things as well.
On that piece of silver lining, I think there were several, but on that one, we'll open it up to the audience. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Evie Litwak. I'm the Executive Director of Witness to Mass Incarceration and Formerly Incarcerated. I work exclusively with formerly incarcerated and justice-impacted people. That probably represents 1 in every 4 people in New York we are not on anybody's radar. We may come to a handful of classes, but if today I had even a small budget, I could bring probably 20,000 people in a room who have no clue that you run any of the programs you run or that you can help them. There's a gap. This is a group of people that are desperate to work because unless you can earn a living, you can't be housed, you can't be food secure. So my question is, who, because I haven't heard anything, who is going to put aside the funding to allow us to bring my population out of isolation, out of marginalization?
A fantastic question.
You have 7 minutes to answer that question.
That's a question beyond my pay grade. But in terms of a small business, I would say this: any potential employee needs to come ready to solve a problem for that business, and that means that they need to be upskilled. We need to focus on how do we get them educated for the future. We have to look at where the puck is going and invest in that, and we need to figure out how we can get those funding so they can get upskilled. But the big idea is those people, especially now in this environment, everything is wide open. You know, they can usually get access to a computer and start learning the AI stuff and go in and say, hey, I'm going to help you with your social listening on online to identify your customer or whatever it is, right? The idea is to get educated and upskill yourself so you can come ready to solve a real problem for a business so they're ready to hire you. I don't care if you've been formerly incarcerated or what gender you are. As long as you come with a real value to add to this company, you are hired.
You know, I think I'm very interested in the work you do, and I'm curious too if there's partnerships or if you're speaking to any of the other kind of workforce nonprofits in the city or state. There's a great network of nonprofits who focus on training, and it seems to me that in 2026, funding from government is tough, but there is a lot of philanthropic funding out there, a lot of corporate funding, and I can imagine. I mean, it's tough, but I can imagine a program with, in partnership with one of these other workforce nonprofits that's focused on the population you represent. One of the things I love about the tech culture, and I think it's brought to New York, is the tech culture. It has its ups and its downs, but one of the things I really like about it is that it is a more open-minded culture, and I think is much more open to hiring from various backgrounds, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Patrick. I'm a small business owner here in New York City, and if improving the economic competitiveness is the goal, should New York require formal small business economic impact statements with each piece of legislation so that policymakers can understand the real cumulative effect of legislation before it's enacted?
The fact that you have to ask that to be a policy goal, I think, is the challenge, right? When we used to pass bills in Albany, we had to put a budget impact statement, which we usually say to be determined or later, which, all right, okay, great. But even asking that means the whole paradigm is wrong. We're approaching this the wrong way. So I would say, no, let's not do that. Why don't we focus on eliminating some of those key barriers for small businesses, which you've articulated so well, which I think you're probably struggling with, immediately. Like, let's not wait for that. And every impact in every bill should be analyzed for small businesses and for others, the housing industry and other places as well. But I think the fact that you have to ask the question is in fact the problem that where we sit today, why we're sitting here today, and why we have to approach this whole process much differently in the long run. By the way, it's going to be TBD, FYI is what most of it's going to say. No, well, let's do so. No, I would say no. Let's do it. Let's just have the real conversation. How do we lower the tax burden for small businesses? How do we make it easier for businesses to open in the state? How do we make people feel the entrepreneurial spirit as opposed to feeling like I'm going to get beaten over the head as soon as I open my small business? As opposed to, did that thing actually address the small business concerns in some bill? I think like we need to like reorient the people, like Clockwork Orange wise, right? Do we make everybody sit and open their eyes and watch the video? Or we need, I think, a dramatic recalibration of how we approach growth of business in this state and in this country generally. So no, but do something more dramatic than a business statement.
I have some ideas if you want to talk afterwards.
Okay.
Great, in the back.
Thank you. Hi, Michael Griffin. I have a small consultancy. I'm in the outer ring of your conversation here from Long Island. I think my comment is probably for Jim, maybe a little bit tangential to Julie. We're talking about workforce issues and getting people trained and into jobs. So I represent military industrial base companies out on the island. And the number one thing I do is say, yes, there's a military industrial base on Long Island. So while we're looking for high-skilled workers, they're on the other end of the spectrum. They have the openings. They're having trouble finding the trained employees. And they're trying to connect with the little loose facets around the island. So I know it's kind of a New York City conversation, but it's an interesting twist I have because I'm working with industry that's out there that's trying to say, there's federal funds coming for the next 30 years and we need to hire. I just don't know your thoughts on that.
The system itself, right? We are out of a system where right now we have a very static system. I go to elementary school, I go to secondary school, I go to postgraduate, I get my degree, and then I go into the workforce. That's not how industry works anymore. We're constantly adapting, right? We're going through a major transformation now. How do you give people the chance to continuously upskill into those higher level wage jobs? We don't really have a system for that. That's what we're trying to solve for in a very small not-for-profit. Now, we're a big not-for-profit, but scale-wise, it's very small. I think we have to completely reconfigure that because there are people in the trades that would eventually be great in one of your jobs. And how do we put them on that pathway? And how do you fund that? And how do you incentivize that? That's a long-term thing which we haven't figured out yet. By the way, we're still talking about how to do course review in some other room as opposed to talk to the industry, solve the problem.
I know you said the question was for probably Jim or Julie, but I always find a way to squeeze housing into this. So, I mean, seriously, one of the biggest reasons we can't find talent for all these industries, and I'm going to speak a little bit poorly on Long Island, so bear with me, but Long Island just doesn't build housing, right? I have many friends and colleagues who have lived in Long Island, the experience you have in New York City, and when you have young professionals who are highly skilled, highly educated, and maybe want to build a family and even work in those industries, if you don't have a place to live that you can meaningfully afford, you just can't stay there. And they're going to ship out, and they're going to Jersey, and they're going to Connecticut, and in even worse scenarios, Florida. So this is why I say most issues, if not all, do run downstream of housing, including securing the talent for industries like yours.
I just want to say this. Just popped in, you said housing, so I'm going to pop housing in there too. One of the most satisfying thing that happened in my business was watching one of my employees sitting in the dining room, and there was another gentleman with her, and she was signing some documents. And I came to find out that she was signing a lease for an apartment just a few houses up the block. And I said, what a powerful statement, because what she's doing is saying she has confidence in this business to pay her wage, her living expenses, her rent, her groceries, and to live in this community. And I'm helping to facilitate that. And I said, isn't that the reason why we're all here and working our butt off? And I didn't quit last week when I got burglarized for the third time. That's why we're here. Right? Provide jobs and people be confident to say, I'm going to work here, and they're going to be open. And just wanted to bring that because it's triggered that memory.
Yeah, go ahead.
I first of all want to thanks to the panel. It's a great panel today. One, I would like to understand the meaning of affordability. Right? Everyone is saying affordability. What is affordability? Is it, you still can buy a Coke for $1, but the Subway is $3, right? But beside the point, the question for Jim is, how, in the workforce development, I own a small business out of Long Island. I'm into remanufacturing of office furniture. And AI, I was born in the 80s, so I've seen the computer, and I've seen the e-commerce, I've seen when the e-commerce came, then nobody's going to go into the malls. That did not happen, right? What are you doing today not for the youth, but for the seasonal employee or the labor that's on the field, for the programs could be available for them to be advanced with technology and the kind of work they're doing? And are there any kind of paid or grants programs coming up to make those employees more skilled for future?
So what we do as a not-for-profit is we try to braid together as many government philanthropic things to do that. One of our largest groups that we serve are the working adults that need to be upskilled. Or, by the way, retirement is going longer and longer now. There are lots of people at the quote-unquote end of their career that could actually provide real capacity and value. And we run programs to have those folks actually work in the industries to build capacity. So there's all types of programs for that older adult. One of the places I teach is Empire State University, which is geared for older adults or working adults in industries and sectors to upskill. So there's lots of ways. I'm happy to talk through some of those things. And I just want to say, because I know we're ending, I'm just happy that Ryan and Heather and their teams put this together. This is an important conversation to have about affordability. And by the way, affordability, that's a whole long conversation, but how do you make it easier to start businesses, live in the state, thrive here? I think those are all the questions, and the fact that we could bring government and the private sector and the not-for-profit private sector is an important part of all of this.
And I just want to add, in terms of, employees and affordability to afford everything, the way things are going now, I think entrepreneurship is the new path to the middle class. Trying to wait for a job to pay you enough to live in this state, in this in this city, is a fool's game. We have, thank God, so much more opportunities. I believe I'm being optimistic with the transition and some of the technologies, but I think it's also important. Great work with the formerly incarcerated is to figure out how they could find their path to some level of entrepreneurship, learning something that could be, some skill that they could sell, right? And leverage in the marketplace to create a little mini business, a solopreneur, right? Because if you're waiting on someone to save you, there's no one coming.
I'll take that as another piece of a positive silver lining. Everyone should be an entrepreneur or own their business. Are there other final questions? Great. Well, I also iterate the thanks to the Business Council for hosting, and Heather and the Commissioner for joining, and thank you for this panel.
Thank you so much.